Welcome to Watchman Tales, where the darkest mysteries and chilling stories come alive. Tonight, prepare yourself for a tale that will test your courage and your sanity. We often think of Halloween as a night of playful fear, of costumed innocence and sugary excess. But sometimes, beneath the veneer of celebration, something darker is waiting. Sometimes the threat is real, calculating, and far more sinister than any ghost or ghoul. This is the story of a protector, a late-night run for candy, and the moment a normal suburban street transformed into a high-stakes, life-or-death confrontation. The day had been a marathon, not of running, but of endless, cheerful, community-driven chaos. I work in community services, and on this particular Halloween, 2 years ago, the annual festival had drained me dry. Competitive games, a riotous costume contest, and the inevitable, exhausting kids versus parents dodgeball. All of it designed to be fun, and all of it leaving me spiritually and physically hollowed out. I was only 22, but I felt ancient as I finally pulled into my driveway. The clock read just past 6 p.m. I was ready to surrender to the couch and the blissful silence. But the night, as it always does on Halloween, had other plans. The call came from my little sister Savannah, 15 years old, dressed, I would soon discover, as Raven from the Teen Titans, with the signature ghostly white makeup. She needed a chauffeur, a chaperone, and, most importantly, a cool big brother. My nephew, Jackson, 11 and radiating enthusiasm in a full Sub-Zero costume, was the payload. Neither of their parents had the energy, so, naturally, the obligation, the privilege, fell to me. I sighed, hauled myself up, and traded my work clothes for jeans and a jacket. I was tired, yes, but the unspoken rule of Halloween is that you do not let the kids down. The drive to their neighborhood, a quiet, well-maintained stretch of suburbia renowned for its generous candy haul, was uneventful. The street atmosphere was exactly what you'd expect. Orange light spilling from windows, the faint sounds of laughter, and the rustling of plastic bags. We hit the ground running. Savannah and Jackson, their faces alight with excitement, moved from porch to porch, collecting their tribute. The world felt benign, charming, safe. There was even one incredibly kind older gentleman who was grilling hot dogs instead of handing out candy, a small, delightful disruption of the Halloween routine. As the evening wore on, the crowds began to thin. We had worked our way deep into the neighborhood, and the walk back to the car was roughly 10 minutes. The ambient noise had died down, replaced by a noticeable, creeping quiet. It was this sudden shift in the soundscape that first raised the alarm in my mind. Then I saw it, across the street. My eyes, trained by a lifetime of paying attention to the periphery, locked onto a figure standing motionless in the shadow of a yard where the porch light had long been extinguished. The person was cloaked entirely in black, a hooded garment that absorbed the meager streetlight, making them seem like a hole in the landscape. I couldn't discern any features, only the unsettling silhouette of a person standing, observing. It was too still, too dark, and too silent for a casual resident or another trick-or-treater. I felt a cold wire tighten in my chest. "Stay close," I whispered to Savannah and Jackson, my voice low and steady. Suspicious person across the street. Look, but don't stare. Jackson, ever the oblivious 11-year-old, giggled, assuming it was a dedicated attempt at a Halloween scare. But Savannah, whose teenage intuition was sharper, glanced at me, then at the backpack slung across my shoulders. She knew what was inside. She knew I wasn't joking. In that moment, she realized the fun was over. We continued walking, our steps quickening ever so slightly. As we passed the figure's location, I risked a quick glance. The figure hadn't moved. They were still staring, a featureless void of black cotton locked onto our position. The surveillance was unnervingly deliberate. We covered another block. The air felt heavy now, stripped of the earlier festive cheer. We were almost to the car when I heard it, a rhythmic, heavy thud, 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 echoing on the pavement behind us. Not the light tap of sneakers, but the solid, weighted impact of boots hitting concrete. I spun around. The distance had closed. The figure was now actively pursuing us. The darkness had momentarily masked the details, but now, under the faint glow of a distant street lamp, the cheap cloak was gone. This wasn't a costume. This was gear. Tactical vest, black, heavy-duty pants tucked into serious-looking boots, and the face was entirely hidden behind a full, featureless spandex mask. My gut clenched with a sick certainty. This person was armed, dangerous, and hunting. My mind went into an immediate overdrive of threat assessment. He's following us. He's armed. This is not a prank. I kept my pace measured, fighting the instinct to break into a sprint which would only provoke a chase. I leaned close to the kids, my voice a gravelly whisper. Listen to me, both of you. Do not stop walking and do not look back. The person I saw earlier is behind us right now. We need to keep our composure. Any sign of panic and we set them off. Just walk.
Jackson's small hand gripped my jacket, his earlier laughter replaced by a frightened silence. Savannah was already pale beneath her raven makeup, her eyes wide with a genuine terror that had nothing to do with Halloween. The final stretch to the car felt like miles. When we reached the driver's side door, the figure was only 30 feet away, still closing the gap. There was no more time for quiet diplomacy. I reached into the backpack, my fingers finding the familiar cold weight of the Glock. I pulled it out, brought the barrel up, and leveled it. "Why are you following us?" I barked, the sound of my voice tearing the silence. The person stopped instantly, raising their hands in a gesture of startled surrender. They stood there for a moment, then, slowly, deliberately, the spandex mask was pulled down. It was a woman, mid-30s, with an entirely unremarkable face. She didn't look like a killer, but the gear told a different story, and she still hadn't answered the question. I pressed the muzzle slightly higher. I asked you, why are you following us? Her answer came in a strange, monotonous, almost mechanical tone that scraped across my nerves. "I'm an undercover cop. I was told there was a break-in, so I came to check it out. When you looked at me funny, I assumed you were the one who did it. Lower that weapon or I will have you arrested for threatening an officer of the law." The internal alarms screamed false. Her story was Swiss cheese. An undercover officer in full tactical gear, wearing a hooded cloak. An officer who investigates a break-in by standing on a lawn facing away from the house. An officer whose immediate conclusion, upon being looked at, is that an armed, nervous trick-or-treating chaperone is the culprit? It was nonsense, a fabricated script delivered without conviction. I lowered the gun, not because I believed her, but because the risk of being arrested, or worse, shot, in front of my sister and nephew was intolerable. "If you're undercover," I challenged, "why the tactical gear? And what was the point of the cloak?" She didn't answer. Her expression shifted. The blankness was replaced by a flash of malice, a brief, horrifying glimpse into pure, unadulterated irritation, the look of a hunter whose prey had momentarily slipped the trap. She wasn't an officer. She was a predator, and I had inconvenienced her. Then, the smile. A slow, chilling, predatory curve of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. "If you didn't have that gun," she purred, her voice losing its robotic quality and becoming genuinely sinister, "this night would have ended a hell of a lot different for you." As she delivered the threat, my peripheral vision registered movement. From between two houses, 4 figures emerged, all in identical, menacing tactical gear, sans the woman's ridiculous cloak. 3 men, 1 woman. They weren't smiling. They had faces of utter blankness, an emptiness that spoke of cold, soulless intent. They were moving, flanking us. "Get in the car, now!" I shoved Savannah and Jackson into the back seat, kept the woman in my sights, then scrambled into the driver's seat and peeled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, the original woman stood frozen, her creepy smile fixed on the departing car. The others simply watched. We drove home in absolute silence, the atmosphere in the car thick with shared trauma. I dropped the kids off, watched them get inside safely, then drove back to my own apartment complex, the paranoia already taking root. Why us? Why that street? The answer came a few days later. An unknown number. A single, chilling image. A photo of my car taken right here in my apartment parking lot. They knew where I lived. They had been watching before, or they had found me immediately afterwards. It wasn't random. The police were, predictably, useless. No direct threat, no investigation. So I went back to the house where I first saw her. The resident, a man in his 40s, confirmed there was no break-in, no strange police activity. He was confused by my story. It wasn't a cop. It was a group. And they had been hunting. I had stumbled into a plan I wasn't meant to survive. The fear of that night lingers, a cold, sharp thing that has led to therapy and security cameras. I still don't know who they were or what they wanted. But I know this. On Halloween, in the dark, the real monsters don't always wear masks. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by someone who swears the haunting never ended, because every time he checks his rearview mirror, he half expects to see a featureless, tactical silhouette still following him home.
The autumn air hung crisp and clean, smelling faintly of pine and wood smoke. The perfect backdrop for a Halloween escape. I was 12 years old, and my parents had decided that year to trade the familiar streets of our neighborhood for something more adventurous, a weekend at a small, family-owned resort nestled deep in the woods, an hour from home. The resort itself was a charming contradiction. By day, it was idyllic. 10 rustic cabins, a main lodge that smelled of hot cocoa, a small glassy lake, and an expansive field where all the festive activities were set up. But at dusk, when the sun dipped behind the dense tree line, the atmosphere shifted. The woods, once a pleasant backdrop, transformed into an impenetrable black curtain. The resort suddenly felt small, isolated, and strangely quiet, as if the forest was holding its breath. That afternoon, excitement was palpable. The air was thick with the scent of campfires and candy apples. I met Ryan, another kid my age, dressed in a surprisingly detailed skeleton costume. His family was in the cabin next to ours. We were fast friends, bonding over shared anticipation for the main event, the haunted hayride, scheduled to start just after sunset. At 7 p.m., the crowd gathered near a massive old barn. The hayride wagon, pulled by a slow-moving tractor, was lined with bales of hay for seating. The driver wore a comical, friendly-looking scarecrow mask. Workers in cheap zombie and vampire costumes milled about, ready to jump out and provide harmless frights. The ride began easily, the tractor groaning as it pulled the wagon onto a winding dirt trail carved through the forest. Torches were planted sparingly along the path, casting flickering, unreliable light. We laughed and screamed on cue as the costumed workers popped out from behind trees. It was the epitome of family fun, manufactured fear, and holiday spirit. But then, the atmosphere curdled. We entered a section of the trail that was significantly darker than the rest, a deep tunnel of shadow where the torches seemed to struggle to penetrate the gloom. The tractor slowed to an almost imperceptible crawl. I glanced toward the edge of the woods on my right, my gaze drawn by an unnatural stillness. That's when I saw him. He was standing precisely where the torchlight surrendered to the pitch black, a silent, static figure. He was not one of the costumed cast. I knew that instantly. The others were exaggerated, theatrical. This man was a simple black jacket, dark jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low, shadowing his face entirely. His hands were buried deep in his pockets. He wasn't moving. He wasn't acting. He was simply observing. He was watching the wagon. And more specifically, I felt he was watching me. For a few unnerving seconds, I felt a deep instinctive conviction that I had locked eyes with him, even though I couldn't see his face. It was the heavy, unwavering pressure of a stare that held no curiosity, only intense focus. It was a hunter's scrutiny. I quickly looked away, my heart thumping a new, anxious rhythm against my ribs. I glanced at the families around me, parents talking, children shrieking with delight. No one had noticed the man. When I looked back, he was still there, utterly unchanged, a monument of silent, unsettling surveillance. I spent the rest of the ride trying to rationalize him away. A tired parent, a worker taking a smoke break, a local resident who hates Halloween, but none of the explanations fit the chilling intensity of his stillness. When the wagon finally returned to the barn, I risked one last look back toward the woods. He was gone. The path was empty. I felt a confusing mix of relief and lingering dread. We rejoined the festivities near the main lodge. The orange lights, the bonfire smoke, the sound of music, it all felt safe again. Ryan and I were near the snack table, stuffing our faces with pretzels, when the cold sensation returned, the instinctual knowledge of being watched. I looked toward the tree line bordering the field, maybe 30 feet away, and there he was. The same man, black jacket, low-pulled baseball cap. He was standing alone, disconnected from the crowd. His posture was one of quiet, predatory patience. Why would he be here, standing sentinel at the edge of the woods, silent and unmoving? He wasn't talking to anyone, wasn't drinking or eating. He was just waiting. I nudged Ryan. "That's the guy, the one from the hayride." Ryan, whose attention span was currently dedicated to a chocolate bar, glanced over. "He's probably a dad. Stop freaking out, man." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But the air around the man felt wrong, static and threatening. His hat had a small, indistinct logo on it, a minor detail that seemed to taunt my inability to see his face clearly. A few minutes later, I looked again. He was gone. It was around 9 p.m. Most of the younger children had been tucked into their cabins. Ryan and I, fueled by sugar and nervous energy, decided to take one last walk. We ventured onto a small, unlit trail behind the cabins, a dirt path that promised a quick, spooky thrill before bedtime. "Just a little ways in," Ryan whispered, shining his flashlight beam ahead. "We have to do one last scary thing for Halloween." We plunged into the darkness. The moment the sounds of the resort, the faint music, the crackle of the bonfire, vanished, a profound, crushing silence descended. The crunch of our shoes on the path was the loudest sound in the world. We stopped near an old, weathered sign nailed to a tree, marked "Private Property." We were perhaps 200 feet deep. It felt like another world. As we stood there, laughing nervously and throwing pebbles at the sign, it happened. Thump, thump, thump.
Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They were coming from deeper in the woods, behind us, approaching on the path we had just taken. We froze. My flashlight beam wavered. "Another kid," Ryan whispered, but his voice was shaking. This was no kid. The footsteps carried weight, a maturity of gait that spoke of an adult. I swung my light down the path, the beam swallowed by the trees before it could reveal the source. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence was absolute, a pressure against our eardrums. And then the voice, calm, smooth, deep, and terrifyingly intimate. "Hey there, boys." It was him. We knew it immediately. The casual tone did nothing to hide the underlying menace. Ryan and I turned, panic flooding our systems. The man stepped into the light just far enough to confirm the black jacket and the baseball cap. "What are you two doing out here? You like candy?" He pulled his hand from his pocket. In the glare of the flashlight, I saw the orange wrapper of a full-sized Reese's cup. "I got a bunch more of these in my cabin," he continued, his voice utterly devoid of emotion.
"Come on, I'll give you some candy." Ryan took a backward stumble. His face was ghostly white. The man took a few steps closer. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't shouting, he was coaxing. His movement slow and assured, like a spider testing a web. "You don't have to be scared. It's Halloween. I'm just giving candy out. I saw you boys on the hayride earlier." That line, "I saw you boys on the hayride earlier," was the final key that unlocked true terror. He hadn't just been watching the wagon, he had been watching us. He had followed us from the public event, watched us walk the perimeter, and now he had successfully cornered us, deep in the one place where our screams would be muffled by the forest. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Ryan's arm and pulling him into a desperate sprint. We tore down the path, crashing through low branches. Behind us, the deceptive calmness was shattered. The heavy footsteps returned, thudding hard and fast, a terrifying rhythm of pursuit. My lungs burned, my vision tunneled on the weak light of the flashlight, but I did not look back. I knew what would happen if I did. The path seemed impossibly long. When the scattered orange lights of the resort finally burst through the trees, I screamed, a raw, ragged sound for help. We didn't stop until we were swallowed by the crowd near the bonfire, collapsing breathless at the feet of startled parents. My dad and a few other men grabbed flashlights and stormed the trail. They came back minutes later, empty-handed. The man was gone, dissolved back into the silent, watchful woods. The police were called, statements were taken, but nothing ever came of it. No one matched the description. No missing car, no one checked in fitting that profile. He was a phantom, an intruder who came out of the woods, found his target, and vanished when the hunt was interrupted. Now, as an adult, the fear is colder, more profound. It wasn't the chase that was terrifying. It was the soft, confident lure. It was the knowledge that if we had hesitated for 1 second, if we had let down our guard and walked toward the promise of candy, the woods would have simply closed around us and our story would have ended right there. To this day, no one knows what really happened inside that forest, but the locals say if you listen closely at midnight on Halloween, you can sometimes hear a man softly offering candy from the darkness.
The thing about working a mundane 9-to-5 office job is that you crave distraction, especially when your favorite holiday rolls around. My name is Roger, and 3 years ago, when Halloween landed on a clear, chilly Saturday night, I was excited for a simple, quiet evening. My girlfriend was out of town, visiting her parents, leaving me alone in my small house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a remote cabin. I had neighbors, but once the sun set and the initial rush of trick-or-treaters subsided, the street dissolved into a deep, unsettling silence. Most families in this area would extinguish their lights precisely at 9 p.m., signaling the end of the night. I had dispensed candy until the stream of little ghouls and superheroes dried up completely. By 10:30 p.m., I was stretched out on my couch, flipping through a horror movie, The Conjuring 2, more as a background noise than actual entertainment, mindlessly picking at the leftover chocolate in my bowl. The television light was the only beacon left in the house. The street outside was a void of darkness. I hadn't seen a soul in nearly an hour, which is why the sound, when it came, felt like a spike of ice in my heart. It was a faint knock. Not the robust, insistent rap of a trick-or-treater, but a soft, hesitant tap-tap at the side door. I assumed it was stragglers or maybe the perennial Halloween prank, the ding-dong ditch. I got up, walked to the side of the house, and pulled the door open. Nothing. Just the empty, floodlit driveway and the faint, restless rustling of autumn leaves. I squinted into the dark, but the air was still and the porch was empty. I felt a surge of mild annoyance, brushed it off as juvenile mischief, and headed back toward the warm, comforting glow of the living room. 15 minutes later, the air of playful annoyance evaporated. It was replaced by a pure, animal terror. The knock came again, but this time it wasn't at the side. It was at the back door. The back door led to a small deck and was never used, ever. The sound set off every neurological alarm bell I possessed. I froze instantly, killing the television and plunging the room into shadow. I strained my ears, my blood turning to sludge in my veins. I didn't hear a knock this time. I heard a slow, meticulous, almost surgical sound, the faint metal rattle of the doorknob being tested, slowly, cautiously. Whoever was outside was not a prankster. They were either testing the lock's strength with painstaking caution, or they believed the door was unlocked and were trying to enter with absolute stealth. I crept low into the kitchen, moving with an unnatural, terrified silence. The back window offered a limited but direct view of the deck. I stayed crouched below the sill, my heart hammering a violent rhythm against my ribs. Through the glass, I saw him. A man, crouched near the doorframe, wearing dark, nondescript clothing. Pushed up onto the top of his head, carelessly, was a cheap, cracked plastic Halloween mask, the kind you buy at a convenience store. It was not covering his face, but it was enough to make the scene feel horribly theatrical, like a nightmare being performed just for me. In his hand, he held a crowbar. He was not trying to hide his presence. His movements were deliberate, calm, and focused. He seemed to know or simply not care that I was inside. This wasn't a nervous opportunist. This was a calculating, cold-blooded intruder. I backed away, hands shaking violently, fumbling for my phone. I didn't dare make a sound. I whispered to the 911 operator, my voice a barely audible tremor, detailing the sight of the crowbar and the man's unhurried presence. The dispatcher, a calm and steady voice in the gathering storm of my panic, told me to lock myself somewhere safe and not, under any circumstances, to engage. Moving with the desperate quiet of someone who knows any creaking floorboard could cost them their life, I crept up the stairs. The bedroom door felt too flimsy. Instead, I stood at the top of the steps, clutching the first thing I could find, a large, sharp kitchen knife. I crouched low, whispering updates into the phone.
The intruder moved. I saw the shadow shift from the back door. The sound of metal on metal followed. Ping. Scrape. He was at the basement window now, carefully, systematically prying the window screen off. "He's at the basement," I choked out, my voice thick with fear. The dispatcher confirmed that officers were less than 2 minutes away. Then came the moment of shattering finality. Crack. The sound of glass breaking. He was in. The calm, surgical approach was over. He was entering the house. My blood ran ice cold. This wasn't a smash-and-grab robbery. He knew I was here. Most burglars flee when they detect presence. This man was forcing entry despite my presence. That realization that his goal was not property, but me, was the true horror. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I heard nothing from the basement, only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the dispatcher's soothing, professional voice. The silence was worse than the noise. Was he moving through the crawl space? Was he coming up the internal stairs? Then came the footfalls returned, but they were outside again. The crunching of boots on the gravel next to the house. He was circling, perhaps searching for another, easier way in, or maybe just confirming the layout. Just as the suspense became unbearable, the night was torn apart by light. Headlights swept across the blinds of my living room window, followed by the silent, rhythmic pulse of red and blue flashing lights painting the walls. The man bolted. I watched him sprint across my yard, abandoning his calculated calm for a desperate, panicked run. He didn't get far. 2 officers, having approached quietly, erupted from their vehicle. The sounds of a struggle, brief, sharp, violent, and then the authoritative click of handcuffs. I stayed frozen until one of the officers came to the door and called my name. When they led him back in cuffs, I saw what he had been carrying, laid out on the curb as evidence. The crowbar, of course, but also a backpack. Inside, the police found duct tape, zip ties, a coil of rope, and later they found a cold, heavy handgun and several kitchen knives. This wasn't a burglar looking for a television. This man had a different, darker plan. The police later informed me that the intruder had a long record of breaking into homes and was a suspect in several unsolved cases where people had simply vanished. His intent, they made clear, was not theft. To this day, the sound of a faint knock after dark makes my skin crawl. Halloween, my favorite holiday, is now a source of deep, abiding anxiety. The fun, harmless scares are forever replaced by the memory of the crowbar, the cheap mask, and the tools of incapacitation. The part that chills me to the bone is not the terror of the moment, but the mathematics of the timing. If the police had been 5 minutes later, if I hadn't made the 911 call the second I saw the crowbar, I would not be here to tell this story. The zip ties were not for my valuables. They were for me. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by someone who swears the haunting never ended, because every time he checks his back door, he expects to see the faint metallic shine of a crowbar testing the lock. Which of these stories gave you chills tonight? Was it the calculating menace of the Tactical Cloak, the predatory patience of the man in the woods, or the horrifying reality of the Halloween Intruder? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Watchman Tales, because sometimes the ones who watch are already watching you. Sleep well, if you can.